All right. First thing is, welcome opportunities for intros. Uh, Anyone want to introduce themselves? Do we have anyone new? No? Okay. Let's see. Standing topics, CFPs.
Yeah, I don't think we have anything new there.
Did we end up having anything happening with FOSDEM? I think, so
I
just
don't think anyone
reference.
was actually going,
Okay.
was kind of where the problem came.
Okay. Yeah. And I know at least for RustConf, I don't think any of the 2024 stuff has been announced yet. So we don't yet know the timing for when a CFP would open. Um, I do think for this next year, and we really would like to get the Omnibor RS implementation into a better state soon, and then that could
Agreed.
be something to try and promote. There is more interest in sort of there are things happening in the supply chain space for Rust, which are good. There's a new Rust RFC to basically get cargo Rust standard build tool to emit more information necessary for SBOM generation. And there's also sort of an effort to get some of the folks who are involved in this space talking more. So the things happening, and it could be a sort of an interested audience. I see a hand raised.
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about the Rust stuff. We've been talking a lot about kind of getting various different RFCs into a final state.
Mhm.
Do you think it might be an interesting idea to basically, on a quarter by quarter basis, set a target and have us focus both the meetings and our development energy on that target? So maybe that target is the Rust stuff, and I roll up my sleeves, or I get kicked out of the Rust thing, however you want to deal with my Rust code. But we all collaborate and really focus on something for the theme of the quarter, get that thing nailed, and then choose another theme, because it seems like we're pulling in a lot of different directions and never really get to uh, a milestone, or get stuff over the goal line.
Yeah.
Sorry, football, or sports ball, whatever your metaphor. But let's figure out how to get some stuff done.
Yeah, I think so that something like that makes a lot of sense. I know that late last year we'd had some, oh, hello cat. We had some conversations about uh sort of what I think what we were calling an end-to-end proof of concept, and identifying what was needed to get from where we are today to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, if it's let's say quarterly focus, like you suggested, whatever those focuses are, they should definitely be things that are within that overall like push to an end-to-end proof of concept. Um, and Yeah, so I know that I think I'd missed maybe the last two meetings of the year. I don't think I was able to go at all in December. Um, I haven't looked back through the notes. Did we the last, as I recall, we had sort of talked about wanting to outline what was necessary for that end-to-end proof of concept. Have we gotten any further on having that outline of kind of what's missing?
Yeah,
No.
I'm not sure because I was a little bit absent in December as well. Um, so I'm not so sure on that piece. Um, so I like the idea of trying to find a group of the willing who want to come together to focus on a smaller number of things. The one thing I would counsel that we'd be cautious about is um, open source projects don't quite work the way commercial software development projects do, in the sense that in a commercial environment, if you say, okay, we've got 5 things we're doing, we should just draw resources from 3 and work on 2. When it usually, that can work in a commercial environment. In an open source environment, you've got various people working on various interests.
Mhm.
And if you try and run that play in the same way in the open source environment, what you wind up with is whoever was working on those other 3 things decides that they're no longer important and they
Yeah,
wander away. So
yeah,
I think we have to moderate slightly the tone of let's go focus. But what I think can be very valuable is getting a subgroup together that says, look, we're going to go run at this really hard for the next quarter. That's enormously productive.
Yeah, agreed. And I think I think we're more in that sort of camp of, you know, we've got a bunch of people who are interested in doing things, and you know, it's more like if we can all kind of coordinate, you know, in a sort of planned fashion, that we know we can get some good things done. I will say to that point, this is one thing I've been trying to be better about. I've made more issues for sort of things I want to do with the Rust implementation, and in general have tried to be better about actually writing ideas down rather than letting them sit in my head where no one else is able to work on them. So there's some different things here. I mean, some of them are kind of just ancillary things, like, you know, being able to set up with a Rust dev container so that if you start so you can start a GitHub workspace and have all your dependencies installed to be able to work on this through, you know, GitHub code spaces. That's like a minor thing. But then there's stuff that's more concrete, like something I'm working on, trying to make the Gitoid type generic over the underlying hash output size, which there's reasons for that. And I'm happy to talk through any of these things. So hopefully that at least puts us in a good place to be set up to do good work on the Rust stuff.
That's very helpful, because it basically puts us in a position where if folks do want to chip in, there are concrete things to work on, and there's concrete assistance for working on them. And I think that can actually be very, very helpful. I'm a huge fan of encouraging people to focus and run towards something by, even if it's an artificially internally set deadline for the quarter. I just don't want people to feel like whatever else that they're interested in is not important as a result.
Right.
And that's easy to manage if you just speak the words.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, David, to your original point, I mean, I'm certainly open if people want to make, you know, working on the Rust thing a sort of quarter goal. I'm happy to work on that, and you know, we can even find some separate time to kind of talk through, you know, stuff that's listed here and kind of what, you know, is missing or needs to happen to get the Rust implementation to where it needs to be.
And what the timeline goals would look like for what you want to accomplish by when.
Yeah.
You know, because the thing about deadlines is they sharpen the mind.
Yep.
Even if they're somewhat artificial. You know, even if they're just deadlines you made up so that you would have deadlines, you would have something to go run towards.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, I think what I can do is there is an open project, but it doesn't really sort of do very much. It has issues assigned to it, but it's not really used very much right now. I certainly haven't done like anything timing related to kind of break down. Like, I think you have the ability to have like a timeline view on GitHub projects. I could go through and try to sort of.
I don't remember the feature set for GitHub projects continues to evolve so quickly that I'm always discovering that the thing I wanted they didn't do, they do now.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, I'm sort of in position to enhance this a little bit and make this into something that could maybe decompose what's there to characterize, like, hey, here's what we can push for in Q1 to move the Rust implementation forward.
Would it make sense to sort of begin with the end in mind and say, okay, we would actually like to target having a working GitHub, you know, having Omnibor working for the Rust compiler by mumble date, and then work back the pieces that actually have to happen to get there.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And I think for that, as far as you know, I do think a good end goal is trying to get the Rust compiler to output Omnibor information, and you know, both, you know, I think ideally it would support both the embedding and non-embedding mode, but basically to have that integrated. And I think in Q1 it might be feasible. There's some redesign stuff I'd like to have happen for the Gitoid crate, which sort of underlies all of this, that is necessary. And then also we don't yet have a first draft of the Omnibor crate that you know, I think that would be sort of the next thing. And I have some design sketches of what it could look like, but yeah. So I think that those things could be sort of Q1. The Gitoid redesign stuff is pretty concrete, and the first draft of the Omnibor crate might be ambitious for Q1, but at least we could shoot for it, recognizing that it might not get there. But then the I don't sort of figure out how long I think it could take to have a proof of concept with the Rust compiler. I will also say, so Ashley Williams from Axo had expressed interest in kind of if we wanted contributions, wanted help on the Omnibor Rust stuff, that they might be interested in contributing as well. So I think if we're, collecting some energy and effort around that, I definitely would reach back out to Ashley.
Totally.
So cool. Okay, I think I have some to-dos to put some more concrete ideas around timing and sort of order of operations for things.
Yep. And who all on the call, just to give you some idea of the folks interested in picking up a shovel, who all on the call is interested in potentially picking up a shovel and making a run at some of this?
I'd be interested in doing like smaller tasks occasionally, but I'll also be trying to do similar things with the Go compiler work. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. No, and that's good. And I will say, and I haven't really raised this yet with Ed, who had been the previous person that sort of talked with them, like the existing Omnibor-go implementations. Previously, we tried to sort of keep the APIs of both sides fairly similar, which I think will still be,
or at least spiritually similar, right?
Yeah.
There are certain patterns that don't actually live on both sides. So like on the Go side, there's a real propensity for the option pattern, which is completely nonsensical if you simply transliterate it to the Rust side. But on the Rust side, there's a real happiness with the builder pattern, which you don't see as often in Go. But they're doing the same kind of thing. They're giving you the ability to build up and sort of tweak knobs on things, but with a minimal knob tweaking and with good default behaviors.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd sort of throw out there, Ryan, is there anything we can do to help you move forward on the Go piece as well? Because I've done some work on that in the past. I know Frederick has done some work on that in the past. My pick up a shovel time right now is a little bit limited, but my can sort of, gesticulate wildly in a productive direction time is still available.
I think right now I'm just trying to fully wrap my head around the spec and what needs to be done for the compiler to start generating the input manifests. As far as that's concerned, I think like as of yesterday, I felt pretty comfortable with all the things that were done. I guess I need to really dig in deep to what tools exist. I think mostly around I'll need to look into, I think we have GitOID tools for Go that exist. I need to figure out exactly what those provide. I know they actually generate GitOIDs. I think there's one part in particular that I'm a little bit confused about that has to do with how we exactly link a input manifest to what it's being a manifest of. Essentially I'm just trying to get, and I think it sounds like you guys have a lot of planning already done for the Rust side of things, so maybe I can use that as a good way to get caught up with what we're working on in general.
I think structurally that the Rust and the Go side at the level of translation will be similar to each other. I think they're going to be quite different at the level of transliteration, because again, the languages have sort of very different opinions about how the world should look, but they're trying to accomplish similar goals. And in that sense, the option pattern versus the builder pattern is like a really good example.
Okay.
Right, because they're both trying to do the same thing, which is allow you to have a minimal, good default, don't have to think too hard, but lots of knobs available approach to building a thing. I'm happy to also answer any questions on any of the Getoid stuff. There's a bunch. I wrote a lot of the Getoid code originally in Go, which doesn't mean that all of it is a good idea. I'm sure some of it isn't. And there are certain things that I started down the path of that we're also thinking in terms of other kinds of utilities that you might want beyond the compiler for this stuff. So for example, in the Getoid code for Go, there's a whole bunch of things about, okay, how do I go point myself at a directory and get out a map of stuff, right? How do I go and sort of point myself at a directory and go find all, where all the manifests are for the things? Because, right now we have other implementations that have taken the approach of collecting a lot of metadata as they go, but it strikes me with something that walks through file systems as fast as Go or Rust, that you could probably just live pull the data from the directory structures pretty quickly.
Yep. So I guess the biggest thing there, so like, yeah, we can get into the details more out of bands or whatever, but yeah, it's like I have a question of like, just how do I understand we probably have the ability to go and generate, but I don't know how. So let's say you have a bunch of .os, like how do I know that they came from these others? I guess where is the input manifest for that .o, and because it came from some .c's or .go's, I guess, in Golang.
Yeah, and I think, and we can certainly dig into that. The baseline idea there is either you would embed in the .o because it's elf, with elf format, essentially a notes section as part of the compilation process if you're doing the embedding version. And then we're having, I think, still conversations about the not embedding path if you were to do the not embedding approach to this.
Got
Yeah,
it.
agreed. And so this is the relevant part in the spec that basically says that for each artifact identifier type, you'd have a deterministically ordered list of these input manifest identifiers in the output artifact. And then we have NXB and NXC. So NXB is specifically if the output artifact is an ELF file, basically how to embed inside an ELF. And then NXC is for source embedding. So like if you're generating code, how to embed it in there.
Okay, cool. I will go through that and make sure that those make sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the source embedding particularly, like I am a huge fan of how Golang handles code generation.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so I think I can make a note. I'll just put it down here because I think this became kind of like our first topic.
It became its own thing. Really quickly, we have had this item hanging out on the meeting time change proposal now for a while. And we've tentatively been talking about moving to Tuesdays 10 a.m. I've only got 5 minutes left before I have to bounce. Is that something we could touch base on and see if that's a cutover we want to do? And if so, when we would want to do it?
Is that
Yes.
10 a.m. Eastern time?
Pacific time.
10 a.m. Pacific time.
So 1 p.m. Eastern.
Nice.
Works for me.
Yeah, 10 a.m. Eastern is a little brutal for the West Coast.
Yes, no one ever considers the West Coast, is what I've discovered, though.
Yeah. I mean, 10 a.m. Pacific time on Tuesdays generally works for me. So, yeah.
Okay.
Who
do other folks
actually
have thoughts or
owns the
opinions?
invite also?
I can actually alter the invite, and then we should probably also do some promotion on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
So do we want to cut over? I would say we probably don't want to cut over with 1 week's notice, but shall we talk then about cutting over in 2 weeks? So on the 24th, or not, actually it would be on the 23rd.
Okay, so we'd have a meeting on the 17th, and then the 23rd would be the change.
Can you put it on the Slack channel?
Oh wait, hang on, no. Actually, I actually can't do Tuesdays 10 a.m. Pacific time at all. I don't know how that got listed as tentative choice. I literally have a conflicting meeting that I run for another open source community at that time.
Okay.
Okay, so we can't cut over to that.
So did we feel like
at least I can't make that at all?
Okay. There's Thursdays 10 a.m. and there's Mondays 8 a.m.
Me.
So Thursdays
just
10
speaking
a.m.
personally, good.
I was gonna say Thursdays 10 a.m. would work for me every other week. I manage people and I do my one-on-ones sort of all in a big block on every other Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, I have a half an hour conflict also at the 10 a.m. Thursday slot. I could do Monday 8 a.m., but that gets to be a bit early for the Pacific time people.
Yeah. I mean, I'm amenable to 8 a.m. on Mondays, but it is early. Like that's, the start of the day.
It's the start of the week.
Hey,
Yeah.
let's kick off the week with Omnibor.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember now how we arrived at that. I do apologize. I'm gonna have to drop in like 2 minutes, so maybe we come back to this next week then,
Yeah.
because I don't think we're at a consensus we're going to do a cutover.
No, I think you're right. So put it here. Okay.
Okay. So I do apologize. I'm gonna have to drop now. Let me hand over the host to you, Andrew, so that I don't
Oh,
take
sure.
the whole meeting down with me.
And thanks, Ed.
There we go. Talk to you later.
Later.
See you.
I also have to leave. See you all next week.
Oh, sure. See you next week. Thanks.
Next week.
Okay, so here we arrive at a thing with two things with a bunch of to-dos for me that I have not done yet. So putting together an ask for different language communities, put together a document to contain materials for Omnibor outreach. I mean, it's been a little bit, but I believe this was basically about sort of having a landing place of like where we could collect at least links to outreach documents. This is pretty much a matter of making a Google Doc and linking to it. So I can do that today. That's not a big deal. This was the thing I'd asked about earlier, which was the end-to-end proof of concept for Omnibor. I don't know that we have that. I mean, I think at least for sort of the parts that I've been involved with, the Rust part, I can certainly work on, as we were talking about earlier, doing that for the chain at least of getting Omnibor manifest generation into at least a patch for the Rust compiler. As for like getting it merged and having the Rust compiler actually do it, that's a bigger process, but I could at least, have a patched version that could implement it. But I don't think we have this overall draft plan. And then this one, I don't know as much now. I feel like at the time I maybe thought this was a good idea. Do people think the GitHub org, node of maturity for implementations, if that's relevant? Because we have, if I go to the main Omnibor org page, we have quite a few implementations. And some of these are, and I've tried to kind of differentiate them with the purpose here. Some of these are intended to be implementations of the Omnibor spec for different, languages. And then some of them are sort of patched versions of tools that are supposed to do Omnibor generation. So a little bit different, like these two sort of categories of things. So yeah, I don't know if we think that it's worthwhile noting the maturity or sort of state. I think my concern at this point is actually that efforts to note that would be sort of, unless we're actually paying attention to it, could pretty quickly fall out of accuracy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we could do is if we figured that some of these were particular priorities, we could pin more things. At the moment, the spec is just pinned. But I mean, I feel like this as is actually kind of works. So, okay. And then use case document. So had this draft, which, yeah, so I think initially we collected input from everyone, and then I'd started to go through and draft up a more sort of concrete document. But as you can see, I did not get very far before stopping. So this is something to come back to, and it's basically a matter of collecting these notes below into a more cogent description of what you would actually, like things you might actually use Omnibor for. And if anyone wants to contribute with this, you can hit me up on Slack, and I'm happy to talk through sort of thoughts on writing this. 1018, yeah. And then create a Google Doc for people to put their own definition of success statements into. Okay, so this is kind of like a description, I think, of what does done look like? Like, what do we consider the goal for Omnibor to be? So I still need to do that. Thankfully, I mean, a couple of these things are pretty much just create a doc and link to it, so I can get those done quickly. Okay, anything anyone else wants to say about either of these two issues? Okay, the RFI, so the white paper and the RFI on software naming, which, opening up the RFI, did the RFI, because I see that there was a deadline there, was that comments closed 12/13? Okay, so this did close. Did we submit anything for this? Draft response. Okay, no, we did not. Honestly, I don't think that's a huge deal. The folks at CISA who are working on this problem work directly with Ava.
I see.
And so I think there's likely to be, a sort of interest in or input from the sort of Omnibor world anyway. And I mean, the original, the white paper that CISA put out discusses Omnibor. Its features in there is sort of one of the three big software identity solutions or concepts that they kind of pick out and analyze. There's Omnibor, Perl, and was it CPE? I think it might have been CPE. So yeah, I don't know that this is necessarily a bad thing. I will say I read one other, and I'd said this on the Slack, I'd read one other response to the RFI, which was the one from the OpenSSF, which mostly focused on sort of broader conceptual things as well as Perl. Its mention of Omnibor was basically that the implementation sort of isn't there yet. It's not really ready for use, which I think is a pretty fair description. So I don't know that generally with RFIs, all the responses eventually get published online. I don't know if that's happened for this RFI yet, just because it only closed in December and they usually take a little bit for everything to get posted. But I'm going to keep an eye out, and when the RFI responses do get made public, I'm curious to go through and read what everyone said. Okay, cool. Okay. If we can, I'd like to skip this and just quickly, I wanted to, I guess this was kind of, I guess this actually was kind of resolved, although there's these extra questions down here. Updating language for Git hashes. Okay, so we still need to sort of update the language, but there was agreement about clarifying that we use SHA-1 DC, or that Git uses SHA-1 DC, not SHA-1. And I think interest in having 3 standard algorithms rather than 2. So having SHA-1 DC, SHA-1, and SHA-256. For anyone who wasn't there for the prior discussion, the distinction between SHA-1 DC and SHA-1 is that SHA-1 DC tries to detect purposeful efforts to generate collisions in SHA-1 and modifies how SHA-1 works in the specific sort of purposeful collision case. Basically, there was a paper that had said, hey, we can generate collisions in SHA-1, and it had some standard kind of vectors of bytes that it said, like, hey, stick this in as part of generating the collisions. And so SHA-1 DC looks for that pattern of bytes and says, if I see it, I assume you're trying to make a collision, and I change how SHA-1 works to break the collision. And it's what Git uses now, because they didn't want to sort of be subject to those collisions. Yeah, and then there was sort of discussion about other things, and I think there had been a discussion on the spec repo about, or even maybe in a prior meeting, about supporting sort of having you have your required algorithms, or required hash algorithms, which would be SHA-1 DC, SHA-1, SHA-256, but then basically permitting arbitrary other SHA-1 algorithms, which an organization might want to use. So, let's say that you want to use sort of all of those ones, but then for some reason you also like Blake, like you want to use Blake too or something. And so, that you could identify or produce sort of additional identifiers, additional manifests that use that hash algorithm. But that basically in order to be compliant with the spec, it can only be in addition to the required 3 and not sort of, instead of. I will say I've been part of what I'm working to build into the Gitoid crate is support to have sort of those standard ones as well as supporting optional other hash algorithms.
So I have a challenge with both additional algorithms and now 3.
Yeah.
And here's what I'm thinking. There is going to be a huge disconnect between the generation of Gitoids, especially for open source packages, and the eventual consumption of them.
Yeah.
If we take a look at, and I think I posted in the Slack channel, folks trying to recompile some Java jars that were built, in the early 2000s, and not actually being able to, rebuild them the same way.
Mm-hmm.
The more different algorithms we have, and the more optionality that we have, kind of the less ability just to snap the pieces together I see. And so I mean, look, I know that this is something we've already decided, but as long as
I don't think it has been decided.
Algorithms, I would just go for SHA-256.
Yeah. Oh, you mean for that? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and just basically say, look, we're supporting one algorithm. We have the ability to potentially support another one. In other words, there's some field that says this is the algorithm that we're using, the hashing algorithm that we're using. But at least right now, SHA-256 seems to be stable and seems to be resistant to a variety of the issues that we've seen with MD5 and SHA-1. And my bias would be to select one with the ability to extend in the future, but not with the optionality of extending, but with the enhancement of the spec to say, okay, SHA-256 is now vulnerable, and therefore we're going to select whatever the new magic one is.
Yeah. Here, I'm going to reply in a second, but I just need to put my puppy in her crate in just a moment.
Ooh, puppy. Yay. Artemis. Come here. My puppy's on the bed. Come here, Artemis. Yeah, come here. Come here. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of humans that want to meet you. Come here, girl.
I hear the jingle.
Yep. Let me see if I can turn my camera around. Artemis, come here. Artemis.
Okay, there we go.
Can you say hi to everybody, Artemis? Come here.
Oh, hi, Artemis.
Hello.
She's my rescue. We're on month 3. So
Nice.
Great.
yes, I've gone from being a cat lady to a zookeeper.
Yeah, my puppy she's 9 months old now. She's a Bernie Doodle, about 45 pounds, and we're starting to. She's getting a lot more time out of her crate or enclosure, and sort of out and about in the house. But we've still found that certain times she needs to sort of have a break and not be getting into things.
Yeah. Well, if anybody in the greater Boston area ever wants to do a dog walk and Omnibor discussion, I'm down for that.
Man, if I were in Boston, I would totally take you up on that.
Cool. Anyway, I'm sorry for distracting with dogs.
No, I mean I started it with the puppy, so no worries. Yeah, okay. So on the point about hash algorithms, I think that at least I think the reason for having the 3 has been to have, excuse me, or I should say right now the 2, which I think we're sort of talking about splitting into 3 by differentiating SHA-1 DC and SHA-1, has been about compatibility with Git. With that sort of the current Git will use any of those 3, although Git tries to, in general, I feel like their documentation hasn't been updated very much to clarify that they use SHA-1 DC, unless sometimes it can be configured to actually use SHA-1, or like older versions will use straight SHA-1. I think the Git project's argument is that, well, the difference doesn't really matter because people aren't generally trying to create collisions, but so basically Git has those 3 hash algorithms. If we don't consider sort of equivalence of Omnibor artifact identifiers with Gitoids to be a requirement, then yeah, I think it would make sense to say basically we only have as a required hash SHA-256, although the spec is built such that if we ever have to move away from it, that it's not going to be horrendously painful because we've already built in the ability to specify which hash algorithm you're using. So I think that, I'll say, like, from a sort of protocol and cryptography perspective, like that feels better to me. Like I like that better. I know that as a sort of comparison point, if anyone's familiar about the difference between sort of JSON web tokens and Pasado, so JSON web tokens basically are tokens that you specify your algorithms that are used for sort of signing and encrypting things. And there have been a variety of vulnerabilities around, first of all, the fact that you can specify algorithm none for encryption and then have no encryption, which is bad. And I don't know why it was ever built like that, but also just that it turns out when you let people specify what algorithms they're going to use, there are lots of ways that things can go wrong. You can have inconsistencies. And also just raises the complexity of interacting with JSON web tokens pretty substantially, versus Pasado basically fulfills the exact same purpose as JSON web tokens, but it says if you are using Pasado version 1, you use exactly these algorithms. There's no what the crypto field calls crypto agility at all. Like it's the algorithms are defined by the protocol version, and everyone just uses the same algorithms, which sort of lowers the sort of possibility of things going wrong. And it also means that if there's ever a need to change the algorithms used, you bump the version of the entire protocol. So you go to Pasado v2 that uses something different, which they have done. I think they're on 2 or 3 now. But yeah, I think that it sort of hinges on the question of how important do we consider sort of exact consistency with Git to be.
So that's probably a broader discussion, and one that having Ed and Ava and maybe some of the other contributors having their thoughts, I think would be really important. My bias is to go with using your example, the Pasado route. Yeah. And the whole crypto agility thing we've seen as problems in TLS. And it's like the number of times I've had to reconfigure my web servers to say, no, these are the only algorithms that you're allowed to accept.
Right. Yeah.
I do that every 6 months, and it's just a freaking pain in my butt.
Yeah.
But I'd also like to ask the folks who've done implementations, what are their thoughts on agility versus just having a single a single well-defined algorithm? So, Yanqui, Bharati, do you have any thoughts on that? What would it change in the work that you've done or the work that you're planning to do?
On supporting multiple hashes, or just choosing and like fixing on one? Is that is that what we are trying to discuss? Yeah. So I think it's currently we are supporting both SHA-1 and SHA-256, right? And even the ELF embedding, we have designed it in such a way that you can add you can support multiple hash types. The more okay, 2 was okay. 1 would be better in the sense that when we it'll definitely reduce the time, right, and space that if we have to support multiple hash types, we'll have to have different directories for the different SHA types, and it adds to it doubles the size, right? More than doubles the size for storing all the manifests and metadata, etc. So from that point of view, having 1 would be a great thing. But 2 and also the time, it takes time to compute the hash for each of the dependencies, etc. So even from the time and space point of view, having on 1 would be desirable. But given that I think the context was initially we were trying to support what Git does, I think default for Git, if I understand it, is SHA-1, or it may be SHA-1 DC to be more precise, but it is it's only 1 hash type. I'm guessing that you can give an option, so it could be made an option to generate 1 or more hash types if that's feasible. Maybe we could default to 1.
Yeah.
And have an option to support multiple hash types if desirable.
Mm-hmm.
And that way implementers can choose to do it, because we do have the mechanism to it's flexible to support multiple hash types anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think even if we reduce the number of algorithms to 1, let's say it's SHA-256, we definitely still want to specify how to deal with multiple, which is, so I think, like, let's say the parallel trees work that we come up, like that's all still good and useful, because we want to build with the assumption that eventually SHA-256 is going to be broken by something. And that we'll need to move away from it. It's, I think, sort of bad luck for ourselves to assume that any scheme is going to work forever. So, but then, yeah, like we would sort of have a specification to say in the future, if we need to move away from SHA-256, so you know sort of already how to handle that, and implementers can deal with it and plan for it. But right now we only use SHA-256. And I think that would be the path if that's what we're doing, like if we're choosing to reduce to 1 algorithm.
Yeah,
So
that would have to make a change in the spec would need to change to reflect that, right? Because right now we are saying that it has to support both SHA-1 and SHA-256. I think that's
Correct.
the wording right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one good thing about SHA-1 is that when you, for example, create the manifest indexing service or the indexing database, it's easier to, when you scan the source Git repo, you can easily just get the Git ID already, it's already computed, right, by the Git repo. You don't need to recompute. So that's something very useful.
Right. So this gets to basically like the degree to which we care about maintaining compatibility with Git. It's like, how big of a benefit is it that essentially Git is already doing the generation for you and already has these object IDs lying around for anything that's been checked into a Git repo.
Right.
And I guess, oh, go ahead.
That I think also raises a very interesting question, which is what percentage of source is going to be stored in Git? And the answer to that is not 100%. So at least last time I looked, the JVM source is in Mercurial.
Right.
Another thing to point out here is that blobs aren't necessarily like going to just be visible in the Git repo. They, as far as I understand, they come in like packs or whatever, depending upon whether Git has decided to explode them out, or I guess you're working on some files and it might keep the ones that you're working on, but you can always tell it to clean up. So those things won't necessarily just be visible to you immediately.
Yeah, actually, Julia Evans had a nice little write-up like last week about kind of a little bit of what Git does here, but the answer for which is basically that stuff gets stored often as pack files, which sort of compress. Yeah, snapshots are compressed using pack files. And I guess there's this article by Aditya Mukherjee that gets into a little bit of like how pack files work. But yeah, basically Git storage is more complicated than you might assume.
Yep.
So here, I'm going to link to these. Yeah, so I think this is definitely not a question that we're going to resolve right now, but I do think that we have more, like now we have a question to talk about. And I think there are trade-offs. I don't know that it's necessarily that there's a sort of objectively right or wrong answer, but more that, there are trade-offs with going either way. If you choose to standardize and just SHA-256, you basically lose out on the Git compatibility, particularly since it seems like the Git move to SHA-256 has stalled. I haven't heard much about it in a while. I don't know that the Git project seems to be focusing on it, and I certainly don't see it being adopted very widely. So I wouldn't expect SHA-256 identifiers to be kind of on hand in a lot of Git repos.
Yep. One other interesting thing I noticed yesterday, I had this question of like what would happen if there was a collision in Widow IDs? What would it do? And apparently the statement from I guess Linus or whatever was that if it did, Git actually chooses to assume that whatever source we came from is the one that is legitimate, and whatever came after is not actually taken in. So from, I guess, Git's standpoint, they think that it seemed to me as they seem to think that any form of collision isn't really a problem from a security standpoint to them, because if there happened to be a collision, which is apparently very unlikely, then it essentially would be protected by saying that the original source is the real commit, and whatever tries to come in isn't actually able to be committed. So then if you wanted to deal with the collision, the way that you would work with that is you actually just change the code a little bit so that
Right. So it kind of puts it back on you to change it. Whereas the Omnibor context, if we have collisions, it's weirder because what you basically, I don't know there's necessarily a good way for Omnibor to do that. I think what you basically end up with is a potentially sort of mistaken linkage in your dependency graphs that you're going to that you construct from sort of collating a bunch of these manifests, where you basically would have two objects that exist somewhere in your sea of things that are referenced across all of your manifests that are colliding and sort of mistakenly believed to be the same thing.
Yep.
So I do, however, think there might be a denial of service attack here. So, for example, if you could generate at run, so at program load time, if you could generate something that looks like a block listed Gitoid. So let's take this out a couple of steps. You have a log4j version that's a bad log4j version. You then put a block list on the Gitoids that are associated with that, and all of a sudden you're not allowed to load that. A malicious actor comes in and creates a collision with something that's not not a bad version of log4j, and they could somehow deny putting legitimate code into production. That's kind of where I see the potential for a collision attack coming in. In other words, it becomes a denial of deployment, and why might you want to deny a deployment? Well, if an existing deployment actually has a vulnerability and a bad actor is exploiting that vulnerability, they may want to block putting an updated app into production. Now, the number of moving parts that you'd have to go through to be able to perpetrate such an attack is like, state-sponsored level hardcore stuff,
Mhm.
that's kind of where I see the attack vector coming from. And look, I'm not a great red team person, so there are probably other attacks that I'm not seeing. But I think the cost of the attack might exceed when I say cost, I mean, the overall complexity might exceed the value of a particular attack.
Yeah, this does seem like
So-
the kind of thing that would be done sort of only in, sort of very contested environments, or where attackers are sort of really, really focused on not being caught or observed.
So another idea when running into a clearance is that we use multiple hashes, right, or 2 hashes, right? If we run into clearance in SHA-1, we consider SHA-256, right? That will be much lower probability when both have a clearance at the same time, right? So if you have both hashes available, then that will, I mean, that's another idea, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
If we have
And
more than one hash computation, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so just so that I understand what already exists, the idea is that it sounded like to me that we're currently doing both, creating both input manifest graphs or whatever. Okay, cool.
Correct.
Yeah.
Keeping an eye on the time. I'm going to need to drop in just a minute, but I think this is a really good discussion, and we've come up with a bunch of relevant points that I've tried to capture here. If I missed anything, please, anyone, feel free to go through and add more notes. I'm going to take this issue, and well, I guess it'll be for the next week, but I think this could be a higher up issue for next week, and sort of more of a focus of discussion.
Mhm.
So all that said, I've got to drop, but thanks everyone, and see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, y'all.